80 million years ago, the little continent of New Zealand broke off from the rest of the world, floated away and started to develop one of the most unique and fascinating ecologies in the world because it had to evolve on its own. Animals and plants from the Americas and Europe and Africa and Asia simply could not reach it, leaving New Zealand with one of the most incredible and unique arrays of endemic trees and insects and most famously, birds. Of the 200 or so bird species New Zealand has, including some extinct ones, a weird number of them are flightless, and of the ones which remain, a majority will just not fly unless they really have to. And why? Because they didn't need to. For 80 million years, New Zealand was a bird paradise. There were no predators, no stoats, no foxes, no possums, no cats, no dogs, no foxes, and especially no humans. So they grew fat and lazy, and many of them lost the ability to fly, and more than that, birds began to fill ecological niches that they don't throughout the rest of the world. Like, New Zealand has the world's only alpine parrot. The kea, and look at it, it is gorgeous. They're one of the world's smartest birds. I mean, they will shred your tires and then go and nick your food while you're distracted, and they are my favorite birds. They could have only evolved in New Zealand when it split off for those 80 million years and the Southern Alps began to lift up and create the environment they needed to inhabit and the ecological niche they could fill because nothing else was there to do it. But why are they my favorite bird? If I wasn't born in New Zealand in this day, in this era, would they still be my favorite bird? I don't know. And is me loving keas really me when so much of what made this possible was decided for millions of years before I was even born? Like, identity is a weird thing. We like to imagine identity as like the culmination of a bunch of choices we make in a row, and that is who we are. But like, that's not entirely true. Not only are we the product of millions of years of evolution like the world around us, but of thousands of years of culture and choices made by other people who came before us, of the circles that we find ourselves in. And somehow, we have to carve out some sense of self from inside that. Like, is my love of listening to Attack on Titan 3-hour music compilations really me? Is my love for terrible calendar chocolate me? Or what about my love for walking in the rain? Or more importantly, what about my values, my principles, my way of judging myself and others and the world? This question has become ever more important and difficult to me in adulthood. Which parts of me are me because of who I chose to become, and which parts were passed down from my parents, from my social circles? Do I believe what I believe? Do I value what I value because I came to that conclusion or because the world did around me? That line is increasingly blurry as I'm getting older. I grew up in a very religious family, and sorting out precisely what I believe, which things I choose, and which experiences and feelings are my own as opposed to something that sort of happened to me is hard, a long road to be on, and not one I'm sure I'll ever reach the end of, especially because there's this fear that maybe I am not who I am meant to be, that I've already lost time to being someone else, and not even necessarily knowing who we could have been if raised in a different context. There's a real sense of loss for people who later in life realize that they're queer and never got a chance to explore that when they were younger. Almost like we're in this race against time to discover the most authentic versions of ourselves who love and believe and do as we do because that's who we are. At some point, everyone has to deconstruct the sense of self they have, and in that process, you can sometimes figure out something that you thought you chose you actually didn't, or something you didn't choose you actually did. And that process never really ends. And it can be profound and revelatory as you learn about yourself and how you're going to relate to the world, but it can also hurt as the sense of self you had once before crumbles and you have to find something new. And that is hard. Ultimately, I am a product of my evolution, but I am also guiding my evolution. I have to guide my evolution. Knowing we can and how we're doing it is perhaps the most important moral imperative we have. At some point, we have to decide which values and morals and beliefs we inherited as children we will take on as our own. Because at some point, the consequences and implications of those morals and beliefs and values become our responsibility in a way that kids don't really have to reckon with in the same way, that a lot of the time they're not even aware of, like fish that don't know the water they're swimming in. Leaving home, finding new social circles, leading your own life leads you to question the life you were living when you weren't leading it, the things which were normal and assumed, and you go, I wonder, is that me? Did I choose the water I'm swimming in? Is that really me? Of course, the truth is we never leave the water, we just find different water. It is impossible for us to take an objective look at our lives and figure out what we could have or would have been left tabula rasa, right? Born in this era, in this time, in this day. And maybe in 20 years, I'll look back at me now and the choices I'm making and the values I have, and I'll go, that wasn't entirely me. But I think I am more me now than I was 20 years ago. I've done a lot of thinking about which parts of me I want to keep and which I don't, and we can only hope that we become more ourselves in the process. Because identity is also about living with the fact that there is no strict line for where I end and the world begins. I love the Kia, which only evolved because 80 million years ago a little landmass split off from the rest of the world, and I happened to be born in that place it turned into, but I think that there's some room for me in that too. Identity isn't just this static, tangled mass of things we control and things we don't, but it's more about the process of trying to untangle that, figure out which strands we want to keep and how to live with the ones we can't change. We do have to do that consciously, and that process never ends, because our millions of years of history also decided who we are. Our genetics can decide our fate, which diseases we are prone to, whether we will get Alzheimer's, whether we will struggle to have children, and even though those are outside our control, they inevitably form a part of our identity, the struggles we face. I suppose the optimistic thing to say is who we are is how we respond to those things. That is our identity. I wrote a story called Constellations of Flesh, Bone, and Memory. It's about a girl who is going in for surgery to fix some of the genetic problems that she's grown up with. Most of her life, she's suffered from a series of conditions passed down from her ancestors, things she didn't choose but necessarily make up part of who she is. And the story opens like this. Safa knew that 25 million years ago, her ancestors decided the forests were no longer for them and left her with a coccyx, that triangular bone structure at the base of her vertebral column, capable of producing daily bolts of agony and little else for her. She's getting surgery to replace the parts of her body which have been causing problems with pieces from other donors, leg, organs, the coccyx, that sort of thing. But as she's lying there on the surgery table, she also reflects on the other parts of her life which she didn't necessarily choose, changes she made to her body because of a social movement to look and sound a certain way, a decision she did in a sense make for herself, or perhaps the color and patterns of her clothes which she inherited from her culture of Azerbaijan, which has a history going back hundreds of years. The things she loves and hates and chooses inevitably being in this mix of things she doesn't control, and yet she is in there somewhere too. She is a constellation of flesh, bone, and memory, like all of us. An image drawn together of constituent components of past and present, of herself and others. Safa in the story wants to see the stars. She wants to fly out to Europa. This is something she has a burning desire for. And with her surgery, she will finally be capable of it. This is something she decides that she has chosen for herself. It is a story of becoming, literally and metaphorically, because ultimately we can never become full stop, as if there's an end point. Life is an endless becoming, and we can only hope to find ourselves along the way. If you want to read this story, please go pick up a catalogue for the end of humanity at the link down the description. It has this and a ton of other amazing stories. It was first published in Small Wonders magazine, really proud of that little publication. Constructing our sense of self is always mixed in with deconstruction, with unlearning who we are and learning who we might become and figuring out the balance between them and what is us and what is not us. It's something everyone goes through in their own way. And I'd love you to share your story of kind of what you learned about yourself and your world that you found yourself in, the water you found yourself swimming in, down in the comments below. Also, tell me your favorite bird. Stay nerdy, and I'll see you in the future.